Hi, I'm Gerald Finken, and I'm CEO of RxE2. And as promised, I said I was going to give you a webinar series talking about this new model for clinical supplies that I'm calling E2 Dispensing, everyone for everywhere, right? Getting medications to everyone, everywhere, anybody, anywhere. The idea behind this is that we're going to incorporate the practice of pharmacy into clinical research. And one of the first things we're going to look at is the dispensing of medication, which absolutely falls under the practice of pharmacy. And so in looking at it a little bit differently by incorporating the practice of pharmacy, I want to go over, again, in the webinar series, multiple things that we need to address or we're going to look at. I think the most important thing as we start down this path of this new model is to think first and foremost about this patient-centric clinical supplies. And I say that because I think in my whole career in clinical supplies, it's always kind of interesting how and why we package and label the way we do. And it finally dawned on me that most of the time as we package and label clinical supplies, it's of course so that we can get the supplies to the clinical site, a GCP, hospital or clinic. So we do all this batch records and package and labeling, kitting, shippers, and then we do storage, and then we worry about, just in time or batching. And in any case, we have this whole methodology about how we're going to supply these clinical sites who are then going to dispense medication to the patient. And I wonder how patient-centric that really is versus a model that I want to talk to you about where maybe the GMP facility sends it to a pharmacy, right, through an individual state, or a central fill pharmacy that I'll talk a little bit about a little bit, that then dispenses it to the patient, right? A little bit different. And in both cases, what I want to go over, just to have the mind, have you start thinking about, as I have, this should be, you should think about me. What do I want to see? If I was involved in clinical trials, what do I want? Right? So it's critical that we take a look at the current method and the new E2 dispensing method of coming through the independent or through the practice of pharmacy. So what I like to think about is what I call site-facing packaging and labeling. And so what do I mean by site-facing packaging and labeling? Well, when I think about most of the work that I did and most of the time that it took for me to package and label clinical supplies had really nothing to do with the patient. It really had to do with how the site was going to receive it, how they were going to store it, how they were going to go get it, and then dispense it to the patient. So for instance, when in package and labeling, in my package and labeling requirements, I'd have to be thinking about, how many shippers are we going to send to the site? How many kits are in a shipper? And what's in a kit? So we have a shipper, a kit, bottles within the kit. And of course, then we have to worry about, the randomization numbers. How is this going to be labeled? And once it gets to the site, how are they going to know, which randomization number? Well, they also need the protocol, because as you know, many sites, you can't just put like 1001 as a randomization number because sites many times have multiple clinical trials going on. And there could be several different kits with 1001 on the label. So we have two types of way of tracking. We have the protocol, which then identifies at a higher level, like which company the study is doing. And then the randomization to say which number within that protocol, kind of a lot number, are we going to select? Are we going to identify that one specific kit or even down to the one specific bottle, right? Then of course we have color coding, and we do that to make sure that like this study doesn't get misinterpreted for another study. So you want this one in yellow and this one in blue. And I've done quite a bit of that in my time. Blinding, this whole thing about I call it perfectly unblinding, lining up labels to make sure every kit has the exact same label. And like, who is that for? That's really so that the clinical site, when they get it, can't tell one kit from the next. And I look at that and say, as humans and even as healthcare professionals, we're pretty smart individuals. We love to be able to see if we can notice a difference, in these supplies, be able to look at from active to placebo, or even when the way it's randomized, what was left and why didn't you use that kit? Again, this whole randomization process, who's that really for? Then, of course, you look at expiry dates, right? We have this whole expiry date issue, especially in Europe. Like, we don't want expiry dates on the labels because it's a retest date. And because, if we put a label, then we've got to relabel everything if it's not used in time. Again, who is that really for, right? That's really for the site and for the manufacturer, so that it makes it easier for them that they don't have to relabel. And of course, then we talk about the storage. How much do you send and you store at the clinical sites, and that all gets into the waste. So when I think about the packaging labeling operations, most of the things, these items, really the patient really doesn't matter that much to them. Because even if you go down to the storage, and there are things that the patient does want to know, even in the storage, how long is the patient taking a medication for? A year? One bottle? No, usually like a week, 10 days, 30 days, and then they're done. The bottle's used. Versus the expiry date and the retest dates and things we're really thinking about is at these kit levels and stuff that can be stored for up to a year at a time. So what I'd like us to really start thinking about is patient-facing. What is it that the patient needs? Do they really need that GMP information? And if you think about it, that's just what happens. In the first model that I showed you, GMP material, right, gets packaged, labeled, kitted, right, and gets sent to the clinical site. Do they do anything with it? No, normally they select the kit based upon the IRT, and they just hand that GMP material straight to the patient. That's really not the way patients want to see things, and I'll cover that in a second. So the patient, what do they want to see? Well, most of the time they want their prescription number so they can identify the bottle if they have other bottles at home, right? Not a protocol number, not a randomization number. It really is not that important. Like to me, I'm thinking, well, I'm in a study. Do I need to remember the protocol number? Not really, because guess what? I can't view multiple protocols. That's an exclusion criteria. I wanted directions, not a use as directed so you can pool supplies that you can use across multiple protocols. No, I want like my instructions. Don't take this with pravastatin. Take twice a day. Don't take it with your pravastatin. That's what I want to see. And I want to know when it expires. Does that go bad before I use it up? Most of the time it won't, because it's like in 30 days. And of course, I want my name on my label. I want to know that when I put it up in the shelf, someone else comes into my medicine cabinet, they're going to know it's for me. I know it's mine. It's on the counter, right? I go someplace, I know that's mine. I have my name on it. And of course, the storage, most of the time want to know, how was I supposed to store that? But usually that occurs when you first get the medication, and most of us won't forget that it's supposed to be refrigerated or it's supposed to be stored in room temperature. So this patient-facing is very interesting. And do we really want, again, a GMP labeled bottle that says take as directed with a protocol number on it and a randomization number on it? I don't think so. I think if you really were to look at this, you'd say that's not really what I want. Taking a step further, patient-centric medication. How much do you want? Most patients that I know, even when they go to the pharmacy and they get their 30-day supply, put them in a 7-day container to say, what am I taking this week? Sometimes they have a 2-week container. But most of the time too, then when prescriptions, many times you get a 30-day supply. And I'm not talking about where the PBMs are pushing 90 days on everybody in the mail orders. I'm talking about most of us have a 30-day bottle, right? Versus this 90-day supply, which is really all about co-pays and stuff. Because who really wants 90-day supply, in their medicine cabinet? Of course, most of the people that I know get 90 days. There's tons of supplies sitting in their medicine cabinet in the day-to-day world, in the real world. So when I say, what about convenient packaging along with this? Do we want a blister card that folds out like this? Do we want something to stick in our pocket, put in our purse, right? Really, most of us want something very convenient, like a small 7-day card or a 30-day count bottle, right? That we can just hide. Because when we're there, we want to take medication. Most of us don't pull out our medication in public places and start taking medication. Usually that's a pretty private thing. And many times I think that's why even the 7-day containers are used, as it's at home use. for that. So we really need to think about these things, about what it is that a patient wants in their medication, even though it's clinical supplies. So when I think about it, patient-centric, as a pharmacist, I think about the commercial, where the GMP material gets sent to the pharmacy then labels that medication specifically for me, and I go home with my 7-day or 30-day supply, and then I come back in 30 days, to get my next medication, or it gets sent to me 30 days. I wouldn't mind it at all if I got one every 7 days, my 7-day supply. So that way, I don't have to worry about losing it, because I do lose things at times. When you think about it, patients want familiarity, what they know. So we all know with how prescriptions work, right? And clinical supplies, it isn't quite the same. We want to go with what they know, again, on the labels, and familiar with the container and a label with my name on it. And of course, we want to go with who they trust. And in 99% of the time, pharmacists are the ones dispensing medication. I shouldn't say 99%. If you're in the hospital, you have doctors or nurses sometimes doing the exit, giving your medications, but that still came from the pharmacy. And hospitals and clinics are getting much better with the pharmacist doing the exit interview. And of course, the home, the home to, or I should say from the hospital to the home type counseling. And this is what's important about patient centricity. And so this is the first aspect that I think is the critical piece about we need to start rethinking how we look at traditional packaging labeling and who is it for and why do we do it that way, to the new method of let's make it patient-centric and let's start looking at this E2 dispensing model, which is absolutely patient-centric. Thank you, and join me next time when I talk about the biggest thing I think that goes with this, and that's ARR pricing. Because as we look at this and you start saying 7-day supplies, oh, my costs are going to be through the roof. We'll discuss that next time. Until then, thanks you for joining me.